Caitlin Clark and the Indiana Fever, they are now 0-5 on the season. My goodness.
I think the beginning of the season was probably the most difficult part for me. Caitlin Clark and the Indiana Fever were now 0-5 to start the season. The national narrative was everywhere: the Fever are terrible. Caitlin is terrible. The coach is terrible. Okay, let's add that one, too. But inside the team, they knew it was only a matter of time before everything started to click. It was just a matter of when we were going to figure it out. And certainly, that moment has come. Clark steps back for three, just below the logo, and drills it. Caitlin Clark was the Fever's point guard, their leader, and their engine. I don't care if we're down 20+ points. I don't want to get beat by 40. We might as well do everything we can to make it close. Clark goes even deeper. She pulls the Fever within three. She's their leader. As she goes, they go. Indiana takes its biggest lead of the night. For me, it's just about competing and playing as hard as I can. I would never give up. And eventually, the hard work started to show. For the first time since August 2015, the Indiana Fever had won 4 straight games at home. But to understand how Caitlin Clark got there, we have to go back to the beginning. Our story starts in college. Keep your eye on number 22. Clark gets the ball. She fires. It goes. She hits. Wow! All things are possible when Caitlin Clark has the basketball. Iowa 86, Indiana 85, at the buzzer. In college, Caitlin Clark was unstoppable. With 5 seconds left, how did you get open? We were in the huddle. That's what I was envisioning. We never stop believing. That's what our group is about. So when Clark turned pro, many people expected the same thing. The Caitlin Clark era in Indianapolis was beginning. Clark herself believed the transition would be relatively easy. It's been an easy adjustment. I feel like it's easy going from Iowa to Indianapolis. Clark drives inside and scores her first basket in the building, off an assist from Aaliyah Boston. It's not that different. I'm putting on a different jersey, but I can't imagine going to a better place. But there was one question everyone wanted answered: would Caitlin Clark's game translate to the WNBA? Clark comes off the screen, finds space, and knocks down a 3. But the reality of professional basketball was about to hit her. I think Caitlin Clark just begins to doubt a little bit. The arrival of Clark in Indiana was something nobody was completely prepared for. It was like an atomic bomb landed with the Fever. I don't think any of us were ready for what that was going to be like. Clark gets inside, draws a triple team, finds Samuelson wide open, and she buries the 3. She's an incredible player, and we knew she was going to make a huge impact. Caitlin Clark had not only led the country in scoring at Iowa. She had also led the country in assists. And sometimes, that part of her game was overlooked because of how spectacular she was as a scorer. Clark gets the block. She was already showing that she could impact the game in every possible way. Making her WNBA debut, Clark uses her footwork to get inside and draws the foul. My life has definitely changed really fast. But at the same time, I feel like I've tried to stay very much the same person that I was when I stepped on campus at Iowa as a freshman.
Keep your eye on number
the spectacle
22.
had lived up to the expectations. Indiana had won. And Caitlin Clark had looked very, very good in her first game in Indianapolis. But that was only the preseason. The real season was different. That was when Clark realized this was no longer college basketball. Clark drives and gets clobbered. I thought it was physical. She takes a moment to get back to her feet after the hard foul. I don't think I was that effective, honestly. And to become effective at the professional level, Clark knew she had to go through a process. That was my post-game talk, the process. We've got a new point guard who's a facilitating point guard, looking to pass ahead, looking to score, a scoring point guard. Clark works behind Boston and tries to force a pass into her. The pass isn't there. Turnover. So we've all got to make those adjustments and continue. It's not going to happen overnight. Clark finishes the first half with 5 turnovers. While Clark and her new coach were still learning how to adjust, another team had already gone through that process. We've got to flood our weak side. Our weak side defense hasn't been good enough. The Connecticut Sun were calm, disciplined, and already playing at a high level. But they wanted more. We've got to be better on the weak side. We have to have each other's backs. Carrington picks Clark's pocket and takes it all the way for the layup. Dejounte Carrington had come to play. Connecticut had built a 12-point lead. Clark was learning just how different the WNBA could be. They're pressuring me full court. They're physical with me coming off screens. It's going to be
When
hard
she
to get
turned
clean
pro,
looks.
I thought it
Clark
was gonna
comes
be
around the
same.
screen from Boston and lets it
Caitlin
fly.
Clark era
The shot hits,
in
but Clark was
Indianapolis
struggling in her
begins
debut,
right
and the
now.
frustration was beginning to show. Guys, you've got to get a stop right here. An 8-0 run in a minute and 26 seconds. Get a stop. Get a stop. Guard somebody. Find a way. Then Clark makes a
It's been an
play.
easy adjustment,
She comes
I
up
feel
with a
like.
steal.
It's easy
Clark
going from
thinks
Iowa
about
to-
pulling up from 3, drives inside, and lays it in. Those are the first points of Caitlin Clark's WNBA career. I thought it took me a little while to settle into the game. I thought the second half was a lot better. Clark gets another look from 3. She knocks it down. The first 3 of her WNBA career. I think I was just more active. I think I was cutting harder. I was setting screens harder. Clark finds another rhythm. She fires
And I
again,
can't imagine
and
going
hits
to
another
a
3.
better place.
Her parents celebrate from the stands. Just getting more comfortable. And that's just going to come with experience and getting to play with these girls. But comfort would not come overnight. Clark
And a
comes
lot of
back to
people
the
have asked,
basketball
will her
with Carrington
game
all over her.
translate to the
The more
WNBA?
games I play, the more comfortable I'm going to get. The Fever begin running their offense with more confidence. We ran stuff a little bit better. We got into some more actions. Just running the ball a little bit better. But before Indiana could run its
I think
offense,
Caitlin
it had
Clark
to
just
secure the
answered that a
basketball.
little bit.
We've got to secure the ball before we can run. Everybody needs to get in there on the glass. Clark makes another great pass, but Thomas gets to it. Another turnover. Her 10th of the game.
Now, the atomic
Obviously,
bomb that
too
landed
many
in-
turnovers.
with the
That's not
Fever.
going to get the job done.
I don't think any
Indiana
of us were
kept
ready.
fighting. Several times in the quarter, the Fever cut the deficit to 7. Then 6. But they could never get over the hump. Connecticut always had an answer. Harris hits a 3.
For
It's
what
her
that
4th
was
of the
gonna be
night.
like.
And the Connecticut
gets
Suns
inside,
spoil
draws a
Caitlin
triple
Clark's
team. Samuelson
WNBA
is wide
debut,
open,
winning
and
92-71. I'm obviously disappointed. Nobody likes to lose. That's how it is. The Fever were learning the hard way. This league was different. But Clark was not ready to give up. Indiana fell
she's an
behind
incredible
early against
player,
New
and we
York.
knew she was gonna make a
At one
huge
point,
impact.
the Fever trailed by
Caitlin
as many
Clark,
as
not only did
23.
she lead the
Yet Clark kept fighting. This process with a new point guard, I love the problem. It's just going to take us some time. But Clark didn't want it to take time. She wanted college Caitlin back. She wanted the confidence, the freedom, and the unstoppable offense she had shown at Iowa. Clark steps back for 3
country
and knocks
in
it down.
scoring at Iowa. She
Everybody
led
knows
the
what I'm pretty
country
good
in
at.
assists
I
as
love
well.
offense.
Clark still on the
Indiana
floor.
began
Bounce
clawing
pass.
its way
Good
back.
fake, good
A
lady,
23-point
it's a foul.
deficit
Well, and
was
I feel like
suddenly down to
sometimes that
9.
would-
Clark was carrying the Fever back into the game. I think Coach Bludder loves offense. That's what I thrived on my entire college career. But Lisa Bludder was no longer coaching her. Clark now had a new
Overshadowed
coach,
because
a
of
new
how
system,
great of
new
a scorer she
teammates,
was.
and an entirely
Clark
different
gets the
level of
block.
competition.
Caitlin Clark
I really
doing a
came
little
into
bit of
this year
everything
knowing that
tonight.
we and my
It's been a
staff were going to do a lot of
well-rounded
teaching.
floor game for
Clark
Clark,
launches
making-
another deep 3. It comes up short. The focus was no longer simply on making spectacular plays. It was about building habits. A lot of it was making sure that we removed bad
Her
habits
debut
and implemented
here.
good habits,
Clark,
habits
she
that are
weaves her
going to
way
stick with us.
inside.
For Clark, that meant changing some of the things that had worked perfectly in college. I think it's just little habits. Breaking little habits that I had in college that just aren't similar to what you do in the WNBA. And defense was one of the biggest adjustments. Clark
My
had
life
been
has
called
definitely
for
changed
several
really fast,
fouls
but
early
the
in the
same-
game. Her second personal foul. Then another. Her third. We were fouling way too much. We were making silly fouls. We were putting them on the line. Defensively,
Time,
the
like, I feel
adjustment
like
from
I've
college
tried
to
to
professional
stay
basketball
very much
was
the same
enormous.
person that I was when I stepped on
Schematically,
campus at
coming
Iowa
from
my
college to the pros, it's a lot different in how you guard. Clark had never been known primarily for her defense. And in college, when the defense broke down, she often had a simple solution: score more points. But the WNBA was different.
The
Clark
spectacle
knocks down
lived
a
up
deep
to the
3 and starts
billing
building
as
momentum for
Indiana comes
Indiana.
up with the win
The
here
Fever
tonight.
fans rise to their feet.
Caitlin-
But the other team had an answer. Breanna Stewart responds with another big shot. That was the difference. In the WNBA, every great performance is met by another great player. Every run has an answer. Every mistake gets
Clark's
punished.
first game in
And every night
Indianapolis,
presents a new
Clark
challenge.
very, very
Every
good.
single game is going to be difficult.
But that
Stewart
was
hits
just the
again.
preseason.
And
In
Indiana
the
is
real
staring at a
season,
31-point deficit. The New York Liberty have dominated the fourth quarter. For Caitlin Clark, the beginning of her professional journey was proving to be much harder than anyone expected. But the process was only beginning. The
That's when
question
I
was never whether
realized
Caitlin
this
Clark
wasn't
could play.
college anymore.
The question was how long it would
Clark
take
looking to
her
drive
and the
into
Indiana
Bates.
Fever to
Carrington
figure
into
out
the
how to
lane.
win at the next level. And that answer was about to change everything. Before the game, Caitlin Clark was already acknowledging that the transition to the WNBA required her to change. I have to get out of some bad habits that I had in college that just don't work here.
I thought it was
For Clark,
physical.
this was more than learning a new system.
Clark taking
It was
a minute
learning
to get
how to
up
lose.
after a hard
It's the
foul.
process. It's learning how to lose after winning so much in college. Indiana fell behind early. Connecticut jumped out to a 13-7 lead. But Clark understood that her value could not simply be measured by points. Tonight,
think I was
my
that
validation
effective,
isn't going to
honestly.
come from scoring.
And to be
It's going to
effective,
come from
she
running my
needed to go
team,
through
getting
the
assists, and making the
process.
right reads. Clark grabs the rebound and immediately pushes the ball up the floor. She finds Van Lith, who finishes at the rim. That was exactly what Clark's coaches wanted to see. I really wanted her to empower her teammates. I
That
wanted
was
her to
my
do a lot of
post-game
talking to
talk,
her
The
teammates.
process.
Sometimes,
Like, we've got
that
a
meant giving
new
Clark
point guard
responsibilities
as
that
a
went beyond
facilitating
running
point guard
plays.
that's looking to
If
pass.
we were doing drills or running certain offenses, I would tell her, and only her. Clark was still learning. Not just the system. Not just the league. She was learning her teammates, too. I'm obviously a
Said,
rookie, and
looking
I'm
to
still
score,
trying to
scoring
find my
point
way
guard.
and learn my way while learning
Here's
my
Clark,
teammates at the
working
same time.
behind Boston.
Her coaches
Dreykus.
challenged her to think. They would throw new sets at her that the team had never practiced before. Clark had to process everything on the fly and put each teammate in the right position. And slowly, it started to translate. Clark uses the screen from
Sneaking
Boston.
into Boston,
She
wasn't
finds
there.
Boston.
Clark
Boston
turns
ties
it
the game
over.
with a beautiful jumper.
So we've got to
Indiana was
all
beginning
make
to
those-
understand what its new point guard could bring. But being a point guard meant taking on another responsibility, leadership. If you're going to be the point guard, you have to be vocal for your team. Every dead ball, her teammates looked to Clark.
Adjustments and
Every time
continue.
the
It's
opponent
not
went to
gonna
the free throw
happen
line,
overnight.
they expected her to call the
5
next play.
turnovers in that
The
first half.
responsibility was unavoidable,
While she and
and
her
Clark
new
was
coach-
beginning to embrace it. But Indiana still had problems to solve. That's the landing, but right now they're outworking us. Connecticut attacks the glass. Boston makes the defensive play, but the intensity spills over afterward. The message was
Were still
obvious.
going through the
Fever were
process.
being beaten
The other
on.
coach had
Effort.
already
They
been
were just
through the
outworking us on the
process.
glass. We didn't do a good enough job of finishing plays. Connecticut had grabbed 4 offensive rebounds in the final 3 minutes. Indiana needed to respond. Clark gets the handoff. She waits.
We gotta
She
flood our
shoots.
weak side. Our
It
weak side
rolls
defense
out.
hasn't been good
Right
enough.
now, we've got to be
She's
better.
calm
We've got to
and
hit open
cold.
shots.
Her team was
Connecticut
already
runs the
doing
other
well.
way. Carrington finishes. The lead is back to 8. Clark understood that being a point guard was not about whether she felt comfortable speaking up. I think as a point guard, you have to be vocal. Whether I want to or whether I don't want to, there's no choice.
But it wasn't enough.
But there was another
We gotta be
side to
better on the
leadership.
weak side, have each
Clark
other's
wanted to be
back.
someone her teammates could trust. I want to motivate them and encourage them. I want to be somebody they can lean on. Then the building erupted. Wheeler finds Clark from near the logo. Clark knocks down the shot. The arena is rocking. And Caitlin Clark is telling the crowd to stand up. That was the Caitlin Clark effect. But leadership was not always going to look perfect. There were moments when Clark struggled to control her
Connecticut
emotions. Clark is guarded by Thomas. Thomas strips the ball away. Harris takes off in transition. Clark fouls her. The officials call a transition take foul. Then Clark gets a technical. The frustration had boiled over. She knew it immediately.
Pressuring me full
Yeah,
court.
I deserve
They're
the
physical
technical.
with me coming off of
She was not
screens,
saying
like,
it to the air.
it's gonna be
She
hard
was
to
saying
get
it to
some
the
clean
officials.
Here's Clark
It was a
around
costly
the screen
sequence,
from Boston.
and it was
Willett.
another lesson. That's growth. She has to learn that in those moments, I need my point guard to have a cool head. Connecticut holds on. A 4-point lead late in the game is enough. The Fever falls short again. But something was changing. Clark was starting to understand what the professional game demanded. And then came
Caitlin
another
struggling
challenge, confidence.
in her debut
After the game,
and just was
Clark was
voicing that
asked
to the
whether her
officials
shooting
in a very
struggles affected
animated
her
fashion.
confidence. Her answer was simple. I never feel like I'm in a shooting funk. They either go in or they don't. And when the shots started falling, everyone could see what made her so dangerous. Clark punishes the defense with a 3. She dances with the basketball. Then she turns the corner and finishes at the rim. 10 points in the first quarter. 8 straight points for Indiana. The talent was never in question. Now, the Fever were beginning to find chemistry. Clark pushes the ball ahead beautifully. Smith finishes. The offense is beginning to flow. We weren't successful at certain things we were trying early, and now we're finding some success in those things. The Fever were starting to look like a team, and much of it was being
And now
initiated by
Clark comes up
Clark.
with a steal.
Gorgeous offense from Indiana in the early
Thought about
going,
pulling up.
all initiated by Clark. But building chemistry takes time. You throw a group of 12 women in a room together, it's not always going to be perfect. It's still not perfect, but these guys are pulling for each other. And Clark was beginning to understand that professional relationships were different from college relationships. Then came another milestone. Clark hits another three. She finishes with 22 points. A new career high. Those were easily the best minutes of her young professional career. But even as Clark started finding her rhythm, the defensive attention around her became relentless. Clark is hounded by Lainey Hamilton. The pressure never stops. They're a great defensive team. They're going to be physical with me. They're strong. That physicality can wear a player down over the course of an entire game. And Clark was discovering just how much attention came with being the #1 overall pick. When you come into this league and you're the #1 pick, everyone knows where you are on the court at all times. One observer put it even more strongly: she has gotten more defensive attention than any young rookie I've ever seen in the history of this league. The numbers told part of the story. Indiana had already committed 7 turnovers. Clark had 4 of them. That was the blemish on an otherwise impressive performance. Because the message from opposing teams was becoming clear, they were going to make Caitlin Clark work for everything. They're going to be physical. They're going to do it again. And they did. Clark had some spectacular moments. But the New York Liberty had the final answer. New York defeats Indiana 91-80. Another loss. Another lesson. The Fever had been disappointed with Clark after the previous game. Now, they wanted to respond. And they did not stop fighting. Clark fires a bullet pass inside to Smith. Indiana battled. They fought. They refused to quit. Against Seattle, the Storm jumped out to a 7-point lead. Then Clark was rejected at the rim. The Fever were facing another uphill battle. But Clark knew what she needed to improve. I think it's just playing with better pace. That was another lesson she had not always needed at Iowa. In college, I didn't always have to do that. But in this league, everybody is all over me. 94 feet of pressure. Traps on ball screens. Defenders constantly chasing her. There was nowhere to hide. Clark answers with a 3. It is the first triple of the game. Seattle stretches its lead to 11. But Indiana stays within striking distance. Slowly, the Fever begin to respond. And something important is happening. The defense is changing. The players are beginning to trust one another. I think we're beginning to work as a unit rather than as one-on-one defenders. That was another step in the process. The Fever finally take the lead. Clark finds Samuelson. Indiana has its biggest lead of the night. 2 points. They are searching for their first win of the season. But even then, the game is not over. A pass slips away. Clark is visibly frustrated. And the Fever still have to learn how to close games.
15.
For Clark, one of the most important parts of that process was building relationships. Having good relationships with your teammates is super important. But at the professional level, that can be difficult. In college, it can be easier because those are the people you're with for 4 years. In the pros, everything moves faster. You don't always have time to build those relationships. You're professionals, and you're trying to go about your business. Still, Clark's confidence remained. I don't lose my confidence. Then came the final seconds. Clark has the ball with 8 seconds remaining. She drives around Aguamike. She goes baseline. And her shot is rejected at the rim. The game comes down to the final possession. Indiana gets the ball back. Christy Wallace prepares to inbound. Clark is ready. The clock is running. All things are possible when Caitlin Clark has the basketball. The ball goes into the corner. It comes loose. Clark dives onto the floor. She fights for it. 5 seconds remain. Indiana has a chance. But the opportunity disappears. It was probably the longest minute of a basketball game I've been a part of in quite some time. The Fever had fought. They had battled. They had given themselves a chance. But once again, small mistakes had cost them. We definitely gave ourselves a chance. But at the same time, there were some little things that we kind of shot ourselves in the foot with. The final whistle sounds. Caitlin Clark and the Indiana Fever lose by 2. Their record falls to 0-5. It was a brutal start. But Clark refused to panic. We're finding our way. It's a process. We're finding our way. And she believed the work would eventually pay off. There's going to be a time this season where it's going to pay off. Then came Los Angeles. The Sparks build an 11-point lead, their largest of the night. Clark tries to rally her teammates. I was just trying to motivate this team and help us dig out of the little hole we got ourselves into. But another mistake follows. Clark turns the ball over trying to go behind her back. Los Angeles takes advantage. The ball moves quickly. Everyone gets a touch. Cameron Brink finishes the possession. Clark gets another opportunity from 3. She takes it. It misses. Boston fights for the offensive rebound. Indiana gets another chance. The Fever cut the deficit back to single digits. But the same problem remains. They could play well in stretches. They could make big runs. They could show flashes of what they might eventually become. But they could not yet put together a complete game. We had spurts where we were really good, but we weren't able to complete a full game. Clark struggles from the field. She finishes just 2 for 10 shooting and misses all 6 of her attempts from 3. But she contributes 9 rebounds and 5 assists. And that was another important lesson. You don't have to shoot the ball well to impact the game in all different areas. Clark pushes the ball ahead. She finds Jackie Young running the floor. The pass is perfect. Clark is finding other ways to make an impact. But standing in her way was the number 2 overall pick. And then Clark makes a defensive play of her own. Her first rejection of the night. Another small moment. Another step in the process. Because Caitlin Clark was learning that becoming a star in the WNBA wasn't going to happen overnight. The college game had rewarded her instincts. The professional game demanded refinement. She had to learn how to lead, how to defend, how to handle pressure, how to control her emotions, how to trust her teammates, and perhaps most importantly, how to lose. For the first time in her career, winning was no longer guaranteed. But the talent was still there. The confidence was still there. And the work was beginning to show. The Fever were still searching for their identity. Clark was still searching for hers. But this was no longer about proving that Caitlin Clark belonged. It was about discovering just how good she could become. The Fever were still learning how to win. And Caitlin Clark was learning how to lead through every kind of game. Even when her shot wasn't falling, the coaching staff knew Clark could still change the game. She's going to impact the game whether she makes 5 shots or 10 shots. It doesn't matter. She's going to find her teammates. And that was becoming one of the biggest parts of Clark's evolution. The spectacular passes, the quick decisions, the ability to make everyone around her better. What a pass! But the chemistry between Clark and her teammates was still developing. We're just learning one another. And I think that comes with game experience. The more they played together, the more natural everything became. You can really tell our chemistry is still building. And suddenly, the Fever were right back in the game. Indiana had erased an 11-point deficit. Now they were within 1. We battled. Clark kept reminding her teammates that they were close. I just keep telling them, we're right there. And they have to believe it. But late-game basketball brings another kind of pressure. And with Aaliyah Boston unavailable, the responsibility shifted even more heavily onto Clark. There was no hesitation. I want to take those shots at the end of the game. I think it's a mindset and a confidence that you have to have about yourself. 6 seconds on the shot clock. Clark launches from deep. She had missed her first 7 attempts. But this one falls. A huge shot. I was due. They had to go in. I had missed so many throughout the game. I was like, it was time for them to go in. The Fever needed something. They needed to experience what winning felt like. They need a taste of a win. And once they get that taste, I think it's going to change everything. Los Angeles answers. The lead is down to 1. But Clark gets another opportunity. She has space. She lets it fly. And connects again. Caitlin Clark waited until the biggest moment to find her shot. The 3 gives Indiana a 5-point lead. And for the first time all night, Clark smiles. She's special. She's different. She has competitors around her, but she just goes into a zone. Clark had finally found that feeling again. The confidence. The belief. The ability to take over when the game demanded it. I think everybody on this team comes into every single day believing we're going to win the game, no matter who we're playing or who is on the other side of the court. And that's really all you can ask. Then the final whistle sounds. Caitlin Clark had done it. Her first WNBA victory. The drought was over. That's definitely a moment we needed at that point. The win proved something to the Fever. It showed them what they could become when everything clicked. It shows how good this team really can be when we click on all cylinders. And for a moment, it felt like the Caitlin Clark everyone remembered from college had returned. But the WNBA does not allow you to stay comfortable for long. Seattle was next. The Storm came out firing. 10 straight points. They had built a 9-point lead. But the Fever had changed. The biggest difference wasn't necessarily how they responded when things went right. It was how they responded when things went wrong. I think the biggest difference for us has been that when teams make runs, we don't crumble. Indiana opens the game with a strong defensive possession. They force a turnover. Clark pushes the ball ahead to Smith, who gets to the free throw line. The Fever were beginning to believe. We always believe we're in the game. And Clark's competitive spirit was contagious. She has a fire that just gets infused into everyone. Clark rises over Orton. 3.
Every single
Indiana
game's
is
gonna
on
be
an
difficult.
11-0 run in less than 90
Brianna
seconds.
Stewart
The
again.
Fever were searching for their second
That's
win of
the
the
way you
season.
respond if
And
you're
this
a
time,
championship
they wanted to win at
coach.
home. Offensively, the Fever were beginning to find their rhythm. But defensively, they still had a long way to go. That's where we feel like we can get them, on that side of the ball. Seattle responds. Collier fights through traffic and finishes with the left hand. The Fever had flashes of
They're
good
a
defense,
championship team.
but flashes weren't enough.
The Fever are
We've had
looking at
glimpses where
a
we've had some good defensive
31-point
possessions,
deficit
but it
as the
hasn't been
Liberty
enough
have
to
been
help us beat
dominant
these
here in the
really
fourth.
good teams in this league.
Before the game.
Seattle begins attacking Clark with pressure. Clark is hounded all over the floor. But she starts recognizing the defensive blitzes. She's getting a beat on our blitzes, so I think we adjusted pretty decently. Then the emotions rise again. A little bump. A little trash
Today,
talk.
Caitlin talking
And
about,
Clark
"I have
feeds
to
off
get
the
out of some
energy of
bad
the crowd.
habits that I
But
had
it
in
also
college
comes
that
with a
just don't work
consequence.
here."
Another technical foul. Her third of the season.
It's the
I think I could
process.
have done a better job of regaining my cool. But that's the fire of passion that gets me going. Clark drives. She finishes at the rim. The Fever adjust. Seattle adjusts right back. Diggin Smith answers on the other end. But Indiana was struggling to protect the basketball. We struggled
Learning
to
how
take
to
care of the
lose
ball.
after
I think
winning
we had
so
8
much
turnovers
in
in that
college.
first quarter. Seattle was moving the ball beautifully.
13-7
The
lead
Fever
for
were
Connecticut
struggling
in the early
defensively.
going.
And they knew it. We're going to continue to adjust as the game flows. But one problem kept returning. We've honestly struggled to guard this team. Seattle eventually pulls away. The Storm lead by as many as 27. And when the final buzzer sounds, Seattle has won by 15.
Caitlin's aware.
Another
She
lesson.
said, "My validation
Another reminder
tonight
of
will
how
not
far
come from
Indiana
my
still had to
scoring.
go.
It will be running
Then
my
came New
team,
York.
getting
And
assists
things got
and
even
making
harder.
the right
The
reads.
Liberty opened the game with a 7-0 run. Indiana couldn't find its rhythm. We missed quite a few shots that we usually make. Clark launches a long 3. It misses. And the struggles continue. Indiana isn't shooting well from deep. Clark is 0, 4th 3 from 3 and 0 for 4 overall. The Fever were facing one of the league's best teams. And they knew exactly where they wanted to go. We want to be where Connecticut is, where New York is,
I
where
really
Las
wanted her
Vegas
to
is, where Seattle is. Those teams represented the standard. They weren't just talented. They were connected. They're together. They're talented, but they also have high trust and high chemistry. That was the destination for Indiana. We're trying to be that team. And we're making baby steps to get there. But New York had no interest in letting Indiana take another step that night. The Liberty blitzed Clark. The pressure forces another turnover. The Fever were getting punched in the mouth. And the result was brutal. New York wins 104-68. Clark has one of the worst shooting games of her young career. 1 basket. 7 attempts from 3. Just 3 points. The shooting
And
slump was
only her.
becoming real.
Like, obviously,
Clark
I'm a
pulls up
rookie
for
and still
3.
trying to find
Nothing
kinda
but
learn my
air.
way and learn
But
my
shooters
teammates at
go
the
through
same
stretches
time.
like this.
Clark using the
You know,
screen from
that's just how it
Boston.
goes when you're a shooter. Some games you're going to get hot. Some games you're not. You might be cold for a few games in a row, and then you'll get really hot. That's just how it works. But for Clark, the problem wasn't limited to shooting. When the shot wasn't falling, other parts of her game began to suffer. She drives. The shot misses badly. Then comes another
I would
foul.
throw some things out there
Clark
with
picks up her second.
some
And
sets that we
Indiana
haven't run.
continues to struggle. I think we fouled too much. We have to defend without fouling. The Fever put New York on the line 30 times. In a close game, that might be enough to decide everything. Clark picks up her 3rd foul. She also has 3 turnovers. 3 fouls. And the game
So
is
she had
slipping
to
away.
think it through and
Then
put
her
people in
coach
the
has
right
seen
position.
enough. Midway through the 3rd quarter,
Samuelson's
Caitlin
jumper
Clark
is
heads to the
good.
bench. So do 4 other
Lead by
Indiana
4
starters.
now.
The question comes immediately, why? The answer is simple. We were down 28. The coach wanted players on the floor who would fight defensively. I wanted to put a group in there that would get out and play some defense. Clark had already picked up her 4th foul. And she would not return. The message
to
from
pick
the
up their
coaching
first
staff
win of
was
the
about
season.
more than one game. It was about effort.
Like, if you're
You
gonna be
can't
point
coach
guard,
effort
you
at
have
this
to be
level.
vocal for your team.
The
They look to me to
frustration
call
was
play
obvious.
every single dead ball.
We
They
were
look to
just
me to
trying
call-
to ask them to keep playing hard. But you can't start there. You can't play in this league if you have to coach effort. It's just too hard. Even the crowd was unhappy. The fans began chanting, "We want Caitlin." But Clark remained on the bench. The
Play
Fever
when
were still searching
the other
for
team goes to
answers.
the free throw
The
line.
coaching staff knew the road ahead
still
would not be
landing, but right
easy.
now they're outworking
We're here
us.
to build a roadmap for them to be successful. But ultimately, the players had to take ownership. They've got to, and that was becoming the defining lesson of Caitlin Clark's rookie season. The talent was obvious. The potential was undeniable. But potential wasn't enough. The Fever had to learn how to defend. How to communicate. How to trust each other. how to handle adversity, how to finish games. And Clark had to learn how to lead through all of it. There would be spectacular nights. There would be brutal shooting nights. There would be mistakes. There would be frustration. There would be moments when the entire league seemed to be watching every move she made. But there was one thing Clark had never lacked: belief. And as difficult as the beginning had been, the process was finally starting to take shape. The question after that loss was simple: how do you figure this one out? From the outside, it looked like the coach had given up on Caitlin Clark. She was benched and never returned to the game. The Fever were now facing Connecticut again. Another difficult matchup. Another reminder that the beginning of the season was not going to be easy. But something had to change. For Caitlin Clark to truly turn things around, she had to leave one version of herself behind. At least, that was what everyone thought. I think the beginning of the season was probably the most difficult for me. The Fever were 1-8. Everyone was frustrated. The questions were getting louder. Oh my gosh, what are we going to do? Clark rises for 3. Yes. But Washington was answering right back. The Mystics were knocking down threes and building momentum. I look back at being 1-8, and I don't even know what I was thinking. But I had faith in these guys. Washington kept shooting 5 threes in the first half, and the pressure continued to build. Nobody enjoys losing. It's not fun to lose. You're a professional. This is your job. You've got to figure it out. For a while, it seemed like the answer was to simply become a different player. A more controlled player. A less aggressive player. A player who would stop trying to be the Caitlin Clark everyone knew from college. But that turned out to be the wrong lesson. Because letting go of college Caitlin was never the answer. I was wrong. Letting go of college Caitlin is not part of the process. The coaching staff never wanted Clark to stop being aggressive. I've never wanted her to not be aggressive and take shots. Clark pulls up from 3. Then does it again. Back-to-back triples. The message was becoming clear. Caitlin Clark still needed to shoot. A lot. Caitlin Clark needs to shoot a minimum of 15 shots a game for us. The goal was not to erase what made her special. It was to help her learn how to use those strengths at the professional level. Her teammates understood that, too. Kristen definitely allowed me to be myself. She hasn't really held me back from what I did in college. Clark creates space. A beautiful step back. Even while fading away, she manages to control the shot. That was the skill Indiana had drafted. The creativity, the confidence, the ability to create something out of nothing. But the WNBA was still different from anything Clark had experienced. This league is so different than anything she's experienced. And that was the reality. This was the best women's basketball league in the world. Every possession was harder. Every defender was stronger. Every mistake was punished. Washington continues to execute. Atkins hits a 3 and gives the Mystics a 1-point lead. Clark goes below the logo. The shot misses. But the evolution of Clark wasn't about never missing. It was about what happened next. The one thing college Caitlin needed to learn was how to move on when the shots weren't falling. I think I'm such a perfectionist. You want to be perfect in every area.
Honestly,
but you don't have time to sit there and sulk about what just happened to you. Clark fires another deep 3. It doesn't go, and that's okay. You've got to be able to let it go, learn from it, and move on. Then Clark makes a play. A steal. Another opportunity. Another shot. Suddenly, the rhythm is back. I've seen this movie before. She found a rhythm tonight. And once Caitlin Clark finds that rhythm, the game can change in seconds. She steps back from just below the logo. 3. Nothing but net. Indiana wins 85-83. The Fever had done it again. And this time, the victory meant more than just another number in the win column. The team was changing. The players were changing. And most importantly, they were beginning to trust one another. You can tell the relationships we've built with one another as teammates and as friends. That has definitely carried over onto the court, in the way we're playing for one another and the passion we're playing with. Clark receives the pass from Wheeler. She makes a spectacular play. The kind of play that belongs on every highlight reel. But basketball isn't just about spectacular moments. It's about understanding your teammates. You have to be able to feel with your teammates. You want them to understand you, and you have to be able to understand them. Boston makes a beautiful dive to the rim. The Fever were starting to move as one. That's where we've been able to change our mindset. Stay together and attack it together. The team was growing. The confidence was growing. And the trust was growing. These guys are just growing together and building confidence in each other. And perhaps the most important change was how they celebrated each other. The way we celebrate our teammates' success, I think that's the best way to play basketball. The locker room was becoming a family. The Fever were still learning. Still making mistakes. Still developing. But
You know,
Clark had
they-
not lost the
they
things that
were,
made her great.
really
She was
disappointed in
simply
her
learning
after
how to
a year.
bring them into the professional game. It's about breaking some habits and getting used to some things you do differently professionally. But at the same time, I didn't lose what made me really good. I tried to bring that here and replicate that for this team, too. And now, the game was beginning to slow down for her. The chemistry with her
Now
teammates
Clark,
was becoming
forward pass
obvious.
inside.
Opposing
Smith.
defenses continued to
really
focus on
fought and we
Clark,
battled and we didn't
but
give
that
up.
attention created
Caitlin
opportunities
Clark,
for everyone else.
rejected by
Clark
Izzy
draws the
Magdalor.
defense. Katie
Storm
Lou
out to a
Samuelson is left
7-point
open,
lead.
and she can knock down that shot, too. That was the
I think
next
just playing with
evolution of
better
Caitlin
pace
Clark.
and-
Not simply scoring, not simply passing, but understanding how her presence changed the entire floor. And Clark was learning something else. She had to enjoy it. I know this is my job now, but I have fun playing this
And
game.
you know, that's kind of a
That
learning
needs
thing.
to be
It's
my
not something
focus
I always
throughout
had to
the
do
year.
at Iowa.
Just
But
have
in
fun.
the league, like, everybody's
Because
all over
when
me.
Clark
They're
was
hounding
having
me
fun,
94
she was at her
feet, you know, I'm
best.
getting trapped on
That
every
was
ball
true at
screen.
Iowa. And it was becoming true in Indiana. Clark gets left alone. Bad idea.
Seattle led by as
She
many
knocks
as
it down.
11, but
Indiana continues
has
to control the
stayed
game.
close.
The Fever
Indiana
lead from
within
start to
striking
finish.
distance.
And the confidence
think
is
we're-
obvious. Coach keeps saying we have to continue to take a step forward. There's no time to go backwards. The message was simple. Keep improving. Keep building. Keep believing. Because Caitlin Clark was the leader. And when she went, the Fever went with her.
Beginning to just
She's their
work
leader.
as a unit
As she
rather
goes,
than
they go.
one-on-one defenders.
Clark was putting on a
Clark to
masterclass.
Samuelson.
The player
And
who
there
had
is,
struggled
believe it or
through the
not,
beginning of
folks,
the season was
biggest
starting to look like
lead of
herself
the
again.
game.
But there
It
was
is
an
now a
important
2-point
difference.
lead
This
for
wasn't
the
simply
Indiana
college
Fever,
Caitlin
looking for
returning.
their first win of the
This was a
season.
more complete version. A player who had experienced failure. A player who had learned from mistakes. A player who understood what professional basketball demanded. And a player who refused to let adversity define her. We never hung our heads. It was something we continued to rise to, the level of what everybody expected of us. Then came another milestone. Indiana
Having
had its
good
first home
relationships
win
with
of the
your
season.
teammates is super
The
important,
Fever
and I
were
think
finally building
sometimes that can be
momentum.
hard to do at the pro
And Clark
level, you know,
remembered
something
something
that's
she
very,
had said earlier
kind of
in the
easy
season.
in college, that's
I
who you're
know
kind
there's
of
going to
stuck
be a
with for 4
moment when we
years.
look back on
In the
this
pro
1 to
level,
8
you don't
start
always
and
have
realize
one
it helped
time.
us somewhere down the line. I think this is now that moment. The Fever had finally begun to understand themselves. Clark pushes the ball ahead. Wallace runs the floor. Indiana attacks in transition. But the season was still a work in
To build those
progress.
relationships like
There
you're
were still
professionals, you're
mistakes,
trying to go about your business.
still losses,
Here's
still
Clark
moments when opponents
with 8
took
seconds
control.
left. Goes
Washington
around to
responds
Gumake.
with a surge.
Drives baseline.
Indiana
And
battles for a loose
rejected
ball.
by
The
Izzy
Mystics run in
Magdalor.
transition. Banks
And
finishes
so
through
it
contact.
came down
The
to the
Fever
last
were still
10
learning how to
seconds.
maintain their level for an entire game.
Box set for
And the 1 to
Indiana
8 start?
here. Christy
Was it
Wallace
painful?
to inbound.
Absolutely. It was not fun. I was frustrated. Everybody was frustrated. The fans were frustrated, too. But those losses had forced the team to confront its weaknesses. And now, the Fever were beginning to look different. Washington kept answering. Indiana kept fighting. Clark
Probably
runs the floor
longest
after a
minute
Boston
of
rebound.
a basketball game
She
I've been
turns
a
on the
part of in
Jets.
quite some time.
Clark attacks the rim. The Fever had been trending in the right direction. The problem was that Washington had an answer every step of the way. But eventually, Indiana's persistence began to pay off. The Fever were no longer collapsing when things went wrong. They were responding.
We definitely gave ourselves
They
a
were
chance, but
learning.
at the same time,
They
there
were
were
staying
some little
together.
things that-
It was just a matter of when we were going to figure it out. And certainly, that moment has come. Another defensive play. Another steal. Another bucket. The Fever were beginning to
We
look like the
kinda shot
team they
ourselves in the
believed
foot.
they could become. And perhaps the biggest
And
lesson from
Caitlin
that 1
Clark
to 8 start
and the
was not
Indiana
about
Fever
basketball.
gave
It was
it a
about
great
perseverance.
effort, but
I
they
think it
fall
taught us
2
all a
points
lesson about
short,
being able to
and they are
persevere
now
and be
0
resilient.
and 5
Instant
on
gratification
the
isn't always the
season.
greatest
My
thing in the world,
goodness.
but that's always what everybody wants. In professional sports, everyone wants results immediately.
So I think-
But development doesn't work that way. Sometimes you can get a little bit ahead of the process. Indiana wasn't going to skip steps. They were going to keep working. We're going to practice until it's perfect. We're not going to skip a step. It's the process.
just a learning process.
And that process was bigger
There's gonna
than
be a time this
basketball.
season where
It's the
the
character
answer
that
payoff.
drives the process. And then the process drives the success. The Fever kept
11-point
climbing.
lead, largest
And
of the night
finally,
for LSU.
they
Team
reached
really
another
compete when we click
milestone.
on all cylinders.
For the first time since August 2015, the Indiana Fever had won 4
And
straight
just like
games at
that,
home.
College
Washington never
Caitlin
led.
is back.
The building was celebrating. The team was celebrating. And the narrative had completely changed. Earlier in the season, the questions were brutal. The Fever are terrible.
And she never
Caitlin
went
is
back in the
terrible.
game.
The coach is terrible. Coach is
Beating
terrible.
number 3
Okay,
of the
let's add that
season,
one.
Sun
But now,
Fever.
Indiana was
Caitlin
in 8th
Clark
place in the
remains on the
WNBA
Fever
standings.
bench.
If the season ended that day, the Fever would be in the playoffs. So the question was no longer, what is wrong with Indiana? The question had become, what can this team become? Look out, WNBA.